Live. Everywhere. On netrootsradio.com. David Waldman. Kagro. In the morning. Now, here's David Waldman.
Hey, good morning, everybody. How you doing? It is Wednesday, July 6th, 2022. Time for another show. We have Greg Dworkin lining up his raft of stories this morning. Everything on track to get you started. When are we 2 days into this shortened work week? Another one of those Tuesdays that feels like a Wednesday that really is a Wednesday, but feels like Monday that feels like one of those Fridays, I guess. I don't know. Just one of those weeks that screws you up. And seems to be screwing a lot of people up. I think probably somewhere in this, I haven't been able to look through the raft O stories yet because there's quite a few of them. 5 topics, as a matter of fact, outlined into 5 topics. I'm just wondering whether any of the 5 topics are there's no England anymore, or at least there's no English government anymore. Over in Great Britain, things falling apart. I imagine this is probably one of the subjects. Greg usually keeps an eye on things overseas, but there's so much going on here and so much going on overseas as well, but maybe he'll want to check in on that. I don't think it's one of the 5 subjects. That's just how busy we are right here in the United States. But as we wait to see how things shake out, we have cabinet resignations in the UK, and I don't know what's going on, and I haven't followed it. I just happen to keep seeing things crop up and saying, well, it really does look like quite a bit of a PR disaster for Boris Johnson. And I guess, are they resigning? We'll check in on it anyway. Are they resigning over his continued refusal to own up to the fact that he was having boozy parties during lockdown? I thought by now, here in the United States, that would long have blown over, usually. I mean, in the way we treat our political scandals here. Or at least the way we did them with Trump. It would just have been superseded by another one. But I guess they really are lingering on these things. All right, well, let's see. We'll check in with that, and I'll see what's doing on Twitter and see if Twitter can explain it. Well, I don't mean to send Greg scrambling looking for stories at this point. There are already 5 topics. That is okay. Let's see. Catching up with the news. I haven't seen anything new come out of the Philadelphia the somewhat puzzling Philadelphia shooting story from July 4th festivities. Just more pictures insisting that a magical hat band saved the life of this police officer, and it's still sort of inexplicable. Okay, Greg says they were probably celebratory gunfire shots falling back to the ground, which I postulated might be the case just because of the 2 officers being hit and just not suffering a great deal of damage. Sometimes the bullets falling out of the sky will pick up enough velocity to do some serious damage. It depends. It depends on the angle in which they're fired and where they are in the trajectory, etc. But yeah, it was a little odd to see. It's the only explanation I can think of that isn't just a total outright lie of planting evidence inside the hat band. I mean, it can happen that the bullet falling, having spent most of its momentum on the way up and being relatively light, falling back down on the way down. Not a magical hat band necessarily that would have saved his life. Though if that were the case, it does lead you to wonder why they don't just make the whole uniform out of hat band. Like the black box question. But anyway, I guess that's the most likely explanation, I suppose. And the idea that they'll ever pick up anybody on celebratory gunfire seems, well, pretty low. In Philadelphia, it's a pretty populous city. They can sometimes do it if there are witnesses who come forward, or occasionally that shot spotter system will come up with a suspect. Although I've read a great deal about that shot spotter system coming pardon the pun, but coming under fire as being unreliable or manipulable, which is really interesting. Of course, it's computer-based, and I suppose it's entirely possible. I think I put aside a story a long time ago. We never got to it. One of the backlog stories that it being computer-based it's subject, to hacking or manipulation anyway, and you can plant a record of the detection of gunshots in the nearby area where you think a shooting either did take place or you need a shooting to have taken place, and you can plant that evidence. It's very odd. I hadn't really given that much thought, but another one of those weird computers are taking over our lives / Skynet moments that I think are worth keeping an eye on. And there are many. All right, yes, let's see. There's here's information Greg is bringing in at the as we speak on what's happening overseas. This is the tweet that I saw go by. This must have gone by in your timeline very recently too. Ian Dunt, who I'm not. This is a screenshot of his tweet. I guess we might as well just bring Greg in to fill us in on this one. But the tweet reading, "There is nothing left to the Tory party. The remaining cabinet ministers look dead behind the eyes," although that was always true. I'm not certain whether this is anything news, but looks like they're in some trouble. What was the next bit of information? Boris Johnson forgot about Chris Pincher groping claims. Oh, I think I did too. Or maybe I never knew about what they were. Anyway, Greg is here. There are at least now 6 topics, but we can stick to the original 5 and explore what happened in the UK later on, if necessary. Greg, good morning.
Let's do that first. It's quick.
All right, sure.
Since you brought it up.
Well, July 4th, Britain.
Boris Johnson was in trouble. We knew that. And a couple of days ago, 2 of his ministers resigned, and then a bunch more ministers resigned. And in this particular case, there is a groping scandal that involves his deputy whip. Now, remember, the whip is the one that's supposed to go and strong-arm people into voting the way they wish.
Right.
And, for example, Will Quince, a minister for children and families, resigned on Wednesday morning, that's this morning, becoming the latest in a growing exodus of officials from the scandal-engulfed government of Prime Minister Boris Johnson. Only 2 days earlier, the minister, Will Quince, had stoutly defended Mr. Johnson's role in the promotion of a conservative lawmaker accused of sexual misconduct and excessive drinking.
That's
this Pincher guy that Boris Johnson forgot about when he endorsed him.
Oh, so he's the groper.
In other
Pincher.
words, there's drinking in this casino, and there's gambling in this casino, and this casino has people in it, and I'm shocked to find all of those things. I feel like I have to resign. What happens is, when you're falling apart, people will look to any excuse, great or small,
I guess so,
to say this is the final straw. Was it really a big deal compared to the other stuff he did? No, but, look, I need some excuse to go. I have to spend more time with my family.
Yes.
What can I use as a
in the last 2 days, I discovered
predicate for that? Oh, this scandal that just came up, I see in my... Let me just open the paper and see what the latest scandal is, and then I'll call that the reason that politically I got to get the hell out of here because this guy is collapsing.
Sure. So the groper's name is Pincher? That's crazy.
Right. Mr. Quince's case laid bare one of Mr. Johnson's vulnerabilities in the season of scandal, says the New York Times. Not only had the Prime Minister been accused of dissembling and issuing false statements, but Downing Street has also sent out representatives to television news studios to repeat these erroneous claims on behalf of Mr. Johnson. That's interesting for the following reason. Okay, Johnson is collapsing. He's not going to be prime minister. He's going to have to step down. His party knows that they lose with him. We just saw that on what they call the by-elections. That's inevitable. It's going to happen.
Someone else.
But the parallel point here is whether you're looking at Jimmy Carter or whether you're looking at Donald Trump, your support only truly collapses when your own party abandons you.
Yes.
Right? And in the case of Carter, it happened in the middle of the malaise, the stagflation, where Democrats said, I've had enough of this. In the case of Trump, it hasn't happened. And it's because it hasn't happened that we are where we are. So the question isn't why people deserted Carter if you're a Democrat. The question is, why haven't people deserted Trump if you're a Republican? Why aren't you a Tory? Why don't you look and see what's going on with Boris Johnson? There's such a thing as hanging on for too long. He's totally innocent, I said 2 days ago, and all of a sudden I discovered that there's gambling in this casino and I have to leave this morning. Must have gotten the overnight polls and looked at him and said, oh, my goodness.
Well,
right? So, the fact that things are happening so badly for Trump here in this country I think is notable. I think it's true. The other day, David Rothkopf wrote a piece in, I think it was the Daily Beast, could have been the Atlantic, I can't remember. But basically it was stick a fork in him, Trump is done. He is. I mean, politically he is. It doesn't matter if he runs again. He's not going to be the nominee. And if he is the nominee, he's not going to win. But I don't think he's going to be the nominee. And the reason he's running and will announce he's running soon is because it's the biggest scam he has left. Tish James has taken away his business scams. And so when he runs for president, he writes all the small donors and say, they're taking your democracy away from you. Send me money. I'll pretend I'm going to use it for either legal fees or for running. And in fact, he just puts it in his pocket. That's what's going on with him. That doesn't mean Trumpism is dead. That's still a huge problem. But Trump himself, not worried about him.
Okay. Yeah, I guess not. Okay, my goodness. Well, we'll keep an eye on what happens there. I don't know. They do it. They're very quietly taking their government apart and collapsing things. It's nice that they do it low key for what I consider to be low key compared to what we had.
Right. So
a coup. Yes.
One of the things that we were going to wind up talking about is elections. So let's do that. That was one of the 5 topics plus England. There'll always be in England.
5 plus England. Right.
Trump. An Atlanta area special grand jury, says CNN, investigating former President Donald Trump's attempts to overturn the 2020 election in Georgia, has subpoenaed a handful of key Trump allies, including Rudy Giuliani, Lindsey Graham, I think John Eastman too. And they had to have a special grand jury with a judge going over those subpoenas because these folks are out of state.
Ah, okay.
And if it's out of state, you can't just subpoena them. You got to pass it through a judge. And the judge looked at the evidence and material and said, oh, yeah, subpoena them.
Okay.
So that's why people think that what's going on in Georgia is real. Eventually, I think they only make a recommendation to the attorney general. I don't think they indict. But there's a lot of stuff that's likely to be exposed. And one of the people that's going to be exposed, of course, is Rudy Giuliani. But everybody knows about Rudy.
Yes.
And what a scumbag he is.
True.
So the thing that's most interesting to me is that maybe Lindsey Graham gets exposed.
Yeah.
Because he's also an enabler, and he hasn't had enough, attention paid to him.
That's true. And he's escaped most of the really serious scrutiny that other people have gotten, and it's about time that he be brought in. So I'm very encouraged to see that, and it makes me think that they're on the right track. I've been wondering, when are they going to get around to this? And it would be a very delicate thing for the January 6th committee to be doing that investigating. It's delicate enough for them to make accusations about members of their own body. Right, yeah, when they reach across and start
the Senate?
trying. Yeah.
Oh, my goodness, you can't do that.
It's a fairly serious consideration.
All aspire to be in.
Yeah, right, for one thing. But, that creates some real, I guess related
tension.
To separation of power. So certainly tension. But it's the same power, but the independence of the two houses from one another is a fairly serious thing too, and they take it pretty seriously. So good. I'm glad somebody else is on the ball on that one, and that might spark them to start talking.
Yakov Smirnov, right? In America, House investigates Senate. In Russia, Senate investigates you.
Right. Yeah. Well, that happens plenty here.
Yeah, and it should happen more.
Okay.
So, Wall Street Journal,
yes.
January 6th hearings to examine role extremist groups White House played in Capitol attack. Again, this is all the background for why I think Trump can run, but he can't hide. Next public hearings are likely to focus on the extent of ties between extremist groups and associates of Donald Trump. That would be 10 a.m. A week from yesterday. That is next Tuesday, this coming Tuesday.
Okay.
And so during your show, second hour, the hearing starts. So you don't get a chance to watch it. But they should be explosive because Proud Boys and Oath Keepers and outlining who's who and, the flow chart of which groups and which are neo-Nazi groups and which are just white supremacist groups and the intersection therein and how Roger Stone was the nexus and whether things were going on in the Willard Hotel that we need to know about. That's what's coming up.
Well,
what we don't have is we have time and date, but we don't have a list of witnesses.
Oh. There might be someone coming in by surprise, like the last.
Yeah, with a armed protection.
Maybe.
Who knows?
Yeah, that's still their last session. That is to say, not the final one, but the previous session with Cassidy Hutchinson. Still explosive and still being talked about and still being written about as a real turning point.
Yeah, and everybody on the
work.
committee says, hey, we got more.
Yeah.
Just wait. Hold my beer. The House Select Committee investigating the January 6, 2021 attack on the U.S. Capitol is expected to zero in on two overlapping areas of its probe in coming hearings: the extremist groups that participated in the attack and a minute-by-minute account of what took place inside the White House that day.
Oh.
Who knows? Now with video, we don't know. The committee in its previous hearings has largely focused on efforts by Trump and his allies to overturn the election.
Yes.
But in the coming weeks, the committee will turn its attention to January 6th itself. So I think they've set up what's going on pretty well. We now know, for example, such things as, and this comes from a Bloomberg article, 7 things we learned.
7.
Yeah. Trump knew he'd lost. Lawmakers sought pardons. Trump wanted to go to the Capitol. That's pretty much established. The let's smear Cassidy Hutchinson thing didn't work. We still, by the way, don't know whether Patsy Maloney is going to testify today.
Still waiting.
Even Ivanka Trump believed her father lost. Pence had a close call. Election Defense Fund was a big ripoff. Okay. Accusations of witness intimidation. So those are some of the things we learned, and that, again, is why I think Trump is just like, no, too much here.
I guess so. Yeah, that Ivanka one is questionable.
Well, sure.
Oh, always, whenever she says anything.
But anything that drives a wedge into the Trump family, that would be okay.
Yeah, that's true. I'm just saying that, there was some testimony from the documentarian saying, we have footage of her after giving this testimony saying, oh, no, he didn't lose.
So, to tie it all in, video of the January 6th attack played in a previous hearing by the committee. And by the way, nailing Ivanka for perjury is fine with me.
Oh, yeah, absolutely.
Video of the January 6th attack played in a previous hearing by the committee showed that members of the Proud Boys and Oath Keepers were at the front lines of the mob as it broke through lines of Capitol Police and then smashed through windows and doors of the Capitol.
Yes.
Now, you probably have to be Marcy Wheeler to keep in your head at all times which ones are the Proud Boys and which ones are the Oath Keepers and what was their role and who was in support and who was planning and all this. So we have Enrique Tarrio of the Proud Boys and Stuart Rhodes of the Oath Keepers, but they met in a garage, and there's video of that. And so both have been charged with seditious conspiracy, and we want to know what's the rest of the conspiracy, and that's why these hearings are so important.
Yeah. And which garage?
I don't know. Ms. Hutchinson said she first learned, maybe the Watergate.
Oh.
Ms. Hutchinson said she first learned of Mr. Trump's plan to go to the Capitol on January 6th from Rudy Giuliani, the former New York mayor who was working as Mr. Trump's lawyer. Are you excited for this? She said he asked her, we're going to the Capitol. It's going to be great. President's going to be there.
Oh.
Afterwards, she said she asked Mr. Meadows about Mr. Giuliani's statement. Things might get real bad on January 6th, she said. He replied, Mr. Meadows has defied a subpoena. Mr. Giuliani denied making that statement or even knowing Ms. Hutchinson or knowing that January 6th was part of the calendar or that Washington, D.C. was actually located where it is. He's denied all of it.
And the hair dye?
Right.
What about that?
Mr. Meadows' lawyer, George Terwilliger, said last week that Ms. Hutchinson's testimony would not, in my judgment, withstand 5 minutes of even basic cross-examination, which means his judgment is pretty suspect.
Yes.
Now, in the days leading up to January 6th, the White House received updates about planned demonstrations by extremist groups such as the Proud Boys and their intention to attend events on January 6th, says Liz Cheney. Ms. Hutchinson said she heard discussions in the White House about the Oath Keepers and Proud Boys when Mr. Giuliani was there. So between Georgia and this, I think Mr. Giuliani is in trouble.
Yes. Good.
Mr. Giuliani wasn't aware, said Mr. Costello, of who the Proud Boys and the Oath Keepers were at the time.
Yeah, right.
Ms. Cheney at the hearing referred to a Capitol Police special event assessment January 3rd, indicating Proud Boys and other groups would be in Washington, D.C. on that date. The target the day could be Congress. And, of course, you may recall that one of those groups at least broke away from the rally and started marching on the Capitol even before Trump was finished, almost as if it were planned.
Yes.
And there's video of that. And so all of that, I think, is relevant and part of why, I think that, it's all tied together. And again, trying to make the case that unlike England, where people, read the writing on the wall, wake up and smell the coffee, hasn't happened to enough Republicans yet.
No, not yet.
A parallel thing, which should be equally troubling. This is a special report in Politico. Despite rebukes, Trump's legal brigade is thriving.
Oh.
Basically, they're making money off of scams.
Yes, all right.
In total, at least 16 lawyers who represented plaintiffs in 5 federal lawsuits promoting Trump's baseless election fraud claims in the key battlegrounds of Michigan, Georgia, Wisconsin, and Arizona remain in good standing or have no record of disciplinary action with the respective bar associations or licensing authorities, according to a Political review. Now, a lot of these things happen because the regulatory agencies really aren't regulatory. It's a, good faith effort that you should live by our standards, but they really have no teeth when it comes to doing stuff. We know this from the parallel medical versions of disciplinary action, where it takes, as we used to say in Brooklyn, forever to take somebody's medical license away for promoting ivermectin, even though we know that doesn't work with COVID. It does happen. I mean, There are people who have lost their medical licenses, but it takes years. And other things to occur. And basically what happens is that if your institution, which are very conservative and slow to move, pulls your ability to practice there, you essentially lose your malpractice insurance, which means you lose the ability to practice. And that happens at least as often as actually losing your license. And again, that takes a long time. It takes an institution to take steps. And they have to do it in a slow, fact-finding legal manner, or they themselves could be sued. It's a mess. So I'm not a lawyer, and I don't quite know how all the different bar associations in various states go. But since Rudy has been a problem for so many years, it just takes forever, and you really have to do something terribly egregious, even though you're supposed to, swear on the Constitution that I won't lie and I'll tell the truth.
Yes.
That's BS.
Well, it's one of those situations where everything, like the January 6th hearings, when people wring their hands about, was there the requisite mens rea and things like this. Well, it's difficult when you're trying to parse between the correct approach of zealous advocacy, as they put it for the lawyers, and crossing the line and floating bizarre theories isn't always.
You can't prove that the insurrection on January 6th was official because you don't know enough intimate facts about all of the participants to prove there was a minion.
Yeah, right. Yes, but as the work goes on, occasionally when something's
what's that got
truly
to do with
egregious.
anything? We know what happened. Yes, we do know what happened. Again, my case is politically Trump is done. Legally, it's going to take forever. I think he's in big trouble. I think Rudy's in huge trouble.
Yes,
and both nationally and state level. State level is always nice because you can't pardon, not that Biden would, but there you have it. Now, 14 of those attorneys have since engaged in additional work in support of the election fraud conspiracy.
Okay.
Those include defending accused January 6 rioters, defending Rudy Giuliani, I would add. And, part of the problem here, again, just like the docs where their institutions take forever to get around to doing something about it, the only reason these lawyers are, quote, succeeding, end quote, is people are hiring them. And that's institutions. Yes. You don't have individuals hiring these people. You have some sort of institution, whether it's a think tank, whether it's some organization, somebody's paying the bills. Yes. So as in Watergate, I would say, well, follow the money.
True.
Find out who's funding these people. Maybe it's one guy.
Oh, right. That's always a possibility.
It could be Escape, a DeVos. You never know.
Yeah. Well, the issue becomes is that illegal for them to do that? No, not really.
No, just put it out in the open so everybody knows what's going on here.
That's fine. We want to do that. Right. No reason not to do that. I suspect maybe Politico will begin working on that.
Right. Unlike Rudy Giuliani, whose law license was suspended in New York and Washington for championing similar cases, which is the fraud stuff.
Yes.
There's a fellow named Haller, Julie Haller. Maybe not a fellow. I don't know. Juli. Julie Haller was part of Donald Trump's legal brigade, filing a lawsuit alongside the ubiquitous Sidney Powell The lawsuit was quickly deemed baseless. She was among 9 attorneys ordered by a federal judge to pay the city of Detroit legal fees, referred for possible disbarment. In a blistering rebuke, Judge Linda Parker called it a historic and profound abuse of the judicial process. Nothing happened to her.
Oh.
She's gained a robust client roster that includes 2 alleged members of the far-right vigilante group, the Oath Keepers. How can they afford her? Who are accused of fueling the January 6th attack. Haller's trajectory from rebuked purveyor of baseless claims to a go-to attorney for MAGA extremists infuriates many liberal activists, including some groups who are targeting the lawyers for discipline. They say those who help legitimize the former president's lies should not be allowed to use it as a foundation to build their legal practice. And then, again, in total, at least 16 lawyers are in this group. 14 of them have since engaged in additional work. And whereas Sidney Powell and Rudy Giuliani are the most well-known, there's a brace of others.
Okay.
There's
well,
a fortnight
we'll keep
of
an eye
others.
on them.
It's a murder of crows, which number 14.
And don't do that to crows. It's really
Now,
nice.
however, many legal experts consider this network of attorneys a risk to future orderly elections. These lawyers have to be stopped from practicing law. It's that simple, asserts David Fink, an attorney leading the charge to disbar the attorneys in Michigan, including Haller. They disregarded their oath. I agree. But again, the parallel I know best is medicine, and you're right. And people are trying to do the right thing, and it just takes a very long time.
Yes. Plus, of course, you got a network of different states to work with. Haller, this guy is trying to disbar her in Michigan, but she practices here in the D.C. area. So, I mean, she could be admitted to many different bars, but interesting. I think she's based in Washington, D.C. She's made some appearances here in Loudoun County at a couple of political events for Trump. So, there's plenty of places to disbar her, and I suppose you can start
we still
the
have work to
process.
do.
Yeah. All right. Well, interesting. It's amazing they can survive. We can survive this 2 minutes, though. Hi, everybody. It's me, David. Let's change things up from the old fundraising pitch for just a minute and talk instead about how you can be a part of our show. If you've got a smartphone or any other electronic recording device, why not sit down and record a segment for us? Read us an important article and give us your take. Read one of your own original essays, or even just give us your commentary on something you'd like to share that's important to you. Then send the file to me at kagrox@gmail.com, and I'll try and work it into the show. Short segments, a few minutes in length, are easiest to fit in. And of course, I can't always guarantee that I'll be able to play everything, but if you've ever shouted at your radio or TV about something you wish was being covered, here's your chance to change that. Make the show your own. Send your submissions to me at kagrox@gmail.com. All right, welcome back now to the Kagro in the Morning Show here on Netroots Radio. Time for us to return to the show, and time for everybody to get ice out of the ice maker. Did you get some ice for your drink, Greg? What's happening here?
Is that me?
HQ here. Well, I don't know.
I'm sorry.
You get your drink, right?
Yeah.
Okay.
Abby said the water's not cold enough, so she
A couple of ice cubes will do.
tossed some ice cubes into her bowl,
Okay. Why not? It's summer.
which is a metal bowl, and you can hear it all over.
Yeah, that's what it sounds like here. Okay. Well, let's see. Where were we? I forget. There was a whole bunch of other things. There
we
were like
had
5
finished up
things
with
that was
talking about
1,
the fact
2.
that Trump's in legal trouble. The
Right.
attorneys who defend him aren't as much in legal trouble, but they
Should
should
be.
be. That was basically what we were just talking about. We're pretty much finished with that topic.
All right.
But if any of you are attorneys out there and know how it works in your local areas, just tell David. You can
I will disbar
tweet
them
him at
myself.
KITM hashtag.
Right.
And or KagroX, which is what he uses as a handle
Why?
on Twitter.
Yes.
And remember, anything you don't like about what I say, yell at him. But let's move on to another topic, one I really didn't want to do, because I never want to do these. But let's talk just a little bit about Highland Park.
Oh, okay.
All right.
It happened.
Another
had a chance.
major high-profile shooting happened, of course, at a July 4th parade in a Chicago suburb. It wasn't Chicago suburb of Highland Park. And it's very close to home in regard to Newtown. We have a Labor Day parade every year. Small town parade everybody goes to. They have a July 4th parade, small town parade everybody goes to. Mm-hmm. I mean, it's shocking to think, even after 12/14, that a Labor Day parade could be shot up in a town like this. But of course it could, because it could happen anywhere. And the other parallel, of course, is that the Newtown shooter who killed his mother and then, went to the Sandy Hook school was a clearly disturbed individual who shouldn't have been anywhere near weapons of mass destruction, weapons of war, which is what they are. I came across a very interesting piece from the National Sport Shooting Foundation, NSSF. That's the effective version of the NRA, which is just there for the publicity and grifting. But the NSSF is quite powerful, represents gun manufacturers, and gets a lot done. And they're much more slick. And they have produced a fact sheet about the AR-15 that you need to know about.
Oh, really?
Which is sort of semi-interesting. But getting back to Highland Park and Newtown, what happened is that this kid winds up being a very troubled kid with a history. In 2019, knives had to be confiscated from where he lived because relatives said that he was threatening to kill people. I don't know where he lives. I don't know if he lives with his parents. In Newtown, the disturbed person killed his mother and then went on to kill people at school. In this case, he scouted out the parade and apparently had been planning this for a while, and then went ahead and 70 rounds were fired from a building, and he hit a lot of people. And, I guess if you want to mix the Austin Tower with Newtown, this is what you get. Yeah, the idea that, he'd have access to all of this, all the stuff we know. But apparently, when he was picked up, he had another rifle in his vehicle when he was pulled over, and other firearms were recovered from his residence in a nearby town. I don't know if he lived with his parents or not, but I do know that in Illinois, you need something called a FOID, which is Firearm Owner ID.
Yes.
And at that age, you can't apply for one unless your parents sign off on it.
Is that right?
And his father signed off on it. And so the idea that the parents are enabling somebody who's really disturbed, as Tom Winter put it on MSNBC this morning, to put it mildly, they were enabling him, assisting him. Way more than that, and the responsibility of the parents, it's just astounding.
It's a very difficult thing. I mean, I can see how you might come to that, but yeah, it's also something that maybe you should be able to find some help from social services of some kind.
Well, they investigated, they did stuff. He once tried to kill himself. He had some mental health evaluation. They took knives away from him.
Yes.
There may not be a legal reason. Maybe the red flag laws weren't strong enough in Illinois or federally at that time. But the idea that your parent would say, okay, well, never mind that, I'm just going to sign for him. That's inexcusable.
I'm trying to. It is. I don't think it can be excused. I'm trying to think of the pressures that they're under, probably including like, well, I want to get a gun. Well, no, we don't think it's a good idea for you to get a gun. Well, remember when I threatened to kill everybody with knives? Yes, that's the reason we don't want you to have the gun. Well, I'm threatening to kill you unless you sign off on this thing. And I could see parents wrongly saying, maybe if he just gets these things, it comes to nothing, and he's essentially
such a
playing
thing should
with
be
things.
Fine, do it at the time, but then maybe you should mention it to the police 3 hours later.
Right. It's not good. It doesn't excuse
After all,
anything.
you already called about the knives. Why don't you call about this?
Right. Somebody did, at any rate. Of course, somebody also spoke to the press in the day or so, probably same day of the shooting, to say, we never saw this coming. We can't. Apparently his uncle was the source of some quotes about this. There was nothing in his background that would indicate anything like this, except for all the things that indicated things like this.
The attorney for the couple is is requesting privacy as they try to sort through the shooting.
I think I will have to. Yeah, right. Well,
the same attorney who represented R. Kelly, by the way.
Is that right?
Yes.
Really?
Steve Greenberg, who has represented numerous clients in high-profile cases, including R. Kelly, says that two other people here will represent the suspect in the shooting, and he's representing the parents. And, look, I'm telling you what happened in Newtown. and the parents of this kid are going to be ostracized.
I guess so. And for the record, R. Kelly was just sentenced to 30 years in prison. So, you know, I mean, you can have a good lawyer and still get sentenced to 30 years in prison. I'm just saying, you know, sometimes good lawyer doesn't help when the case is open and shut. And this is not
Right.
going to be.
And there are people who are friends of the mom in Newtown who argue it's just she's getting an unfair rap.
I'm
and
sure
fine, I understand,
I
acknowledge that. I'm sure this couple has friends too. But I'm also telling you what's going to happen.
I'm sure. Yeah, well, I don't think they're going to put up that much of a fight. I think essentially, it seems to me like they're coming to the realization that, yes.
This was not a good thing. And,
right.
you know,
we didn't do the best we could have here.
They're requesting privacy as they try to sort through. Good. All right. Give them privacy. Let them sort through.
Although sometimes they get that privacy. Whatever happened to that family? There was a school shooting not long ago that in a similar situation where the parents too were providing the guns that ended up being used, and then they went on the lam, right? They ran away and went into hiding, and it lasted
they were
about
picked
20
up in some factory
hours.
hiding.
Yeah. And, well, you know, we're too busy trying to figure out what is happening everywhere else.
72 other shootings have happened since then, so I've lost track.
Oh, right. No,
that's your job.
I don't know. I don't
go
know how
find
I
out
can
and report
track
back
that.
to us tomorrow.
Okay, sure. R. Kelly knows. I'll ask him.
Yeah. So, according to the Washington Post, police were contacted in September 2019 by a relative who reported that this guy, whose name I won't say, had a collection of knives and said he was going to kill everyone.
Yes, bad.
Police took the weapons but didn't see criminal charges, and at the time there was no probable cause to arrest. There were no complaints that were signed by any of the victims. Officers had also been called to the home earlier that year, 2019, because of a reported suicide attempt.
Yeah.
The suspected attacker in the months after the two visits from the police acquired 5 firearms, including the powerful rifle, you know, which, as they say on TV, were acquired legally. As if that means something.
I'm not certain how to take that. But I don't know what the
state
today,
of the
law
so we'll
is in Illinois. But it was also clear from the audio that came from the event that he had possession of some high-capacity magazines, which I imagine might be a problem in Illinois at some point, somewhere along. I mean, at least of his problems, I guess, given that he's charged with 7 counts of murder. But I don't know whether you can acquire those 30-round magazines legally anymore. The rifle, maybe, yes, but maybe not the magazines so much.
So, meanwhile, in Uvalde,
yes,
the mayor is claiming that the Texas Department of Public Safety is covering up the investigation of the massacre.
The mayor is claiming that
there's all sorts of stories about the local police hassling local parents who are involved.
Right.
It's a weird situation there. I don't know what side the mayor is on.
Yeah, hard to tell. The mayor was yelling at people very early on, and got into a shouting match with Beto O'Rourke at some point, who said, you know, the truth about what was going on down there. So he's not I don't. Yeah, it's difficult to tell where he stands in all this, but now he's fighting.
Let's just say he's cross-pressured.
Yes, I think that's fair to say. Okay, interesting. Some fissures.
He fears that the families are not getting the information they need, but
they aren't.
He's afraid that what may happen is that it may look bad for Republicans and good for Democrats. So that you can't have that, and that obviously trumps everything.
Yeah, pretty much. So, all right. So, I guess the governor there probably said, I can take the shots. Go ahead.
Right. So, let's turn to one of the other topics we have on the list here, and that's general elections, or elections generally, or however you want to put it. Oh. It's a very interesting article in the National Journal by pollster Natalie Jackson, who works at PRRI. She's going to have a regular column at National Journal. It's going to be unlocked. Which is good because National Journal costs a lot of money.
Yeah, it's national.
I know. I used to subscribe to it, and it costs a lot of money.
Yeah,
I don't anymore. Has the generic ballot question lost its predictive power? The tried and true measure of the House horse race may now be a measure of the national political environment and its partisan divisions more than a measure of electoral outcomes. So keep that in mind when you see that the trend is toward Democrats, which is good, but only by a few points after the Roe-Dobbs decision. Still don't know what to call it. But expressive responding, which is respondents giving the answer that aligns with their partisanship regardless of what the question is, seems to be infiltrating all sorts of survey questions, and that includes the partisan ballot. And so you can't really tell as much from it as you used to.
Oh, I mean, that sounds
trends combine to render
a
generic ballot question less trustworthy than ever. People still use it. It's built into all of this forecasts and simulations. And to give an idea of how some of these forecasts and simulations don't work, she points out, just for instance, forecasts relying on simulations such as 538's will inherently generate some unrealistic outcomes. With 212 Republicans currently in the House, if all 41 possible Democrat losses come to fruition, Republicans would have 253 seats. An analysis of the July 3rd model output shows that 15% of the time, the simulations exceed 253 seats for Republicans, which is virtually impossible because the rest of the seats are like locked in solid. Like a Republican's not winning AOC's seat.
Not likely, no.
Right. So if the 15% of the time the simulations have Republicans winning more than they possibly can, then, keep in mind that the simulations aren't everything they're cracked up to be.
Okay.
So there's a Republican-friendly political environment. The generic ballot question provides evidence of that. Model forecasts do. But all approaches to guessing exactly how many seats, good luck with that. Don't believe every number you see without carefully considering its context, is her conclusion. And Professor Darren Hutchinson adds, a popular Twitter narrative is returning full scale that Democrats need to inspire young people to vote, and they're failing. No. And he gives historical evidence going back to 1986 that every 2 years the youth vote is always down. Always.
You mean compared to
18 to 29 compared to olders?
Yeah.
I mean, the 60 plus pretty much always come
out. Okay. But they're not fewer younger people voting. It's the same
every 2
number.
years there aren't fewer younger people. They're not younger people voting less than their other age cohorts.
They're just they're voting the way they usually vote.
As much as the meme makes it sound, but it is lower, and the differences between the presidential and the every 2 year off election, by-elections, as they might say in England, are still pretty stark.
Okay. Well, they should
like in 2014, for example. In 2014, every age group didn't turn out.
Oh. Well,
it was a pretty bad year for voting. But in 2018, the turnout was much better.
Okay.
Trump mobilized everybody.
Yeah, we had seen the disaster. So it makes sense that every once in a while, I guess you got to have a couple of disasters in order to get the younger people
keep that in mind. The flip side of that coin is all we need to do is win is get the youth vote. Well, good luck. Oh. All you need to do to win is get the people who don't normally vote to get out and vote in a off-year election.
Yeah.
Well, that generally does not happen. But it did in 2016, so we'll see.
Okay.
That's why Natalie Jackson says take those numbers, under advisement.
Yeah, it's too bad. All of a sudden,
now in that regard, in that context here.
Okay.
And only in that context, I have a little brief tweet storm from Jordan Weissman, who is a author, writer, and editor at Slate, focused on economics and politics. The angry reactions every time a Democrat makes the obvious point that people need to come out and vote are just so tiresome. See the replies here. See, this is part of the game, he says. Highly intelligent voters acting like they don't understand the limits of a 50-seat Senate with Joe Manchin and saying that under Obama they got nothing, why should I come out and vote? When those same people spent 2017 very, very effing concerned that Trump was going to repeal the Affordable Care Act or roll back Dodd-Frank. And rightfully so they were concerned. And so you voted. And you lost when it counted, 2010 and 2016. And now you have more work to do. Now, voters in Georgia did something incredible. That still left Democrats at the mercy of a guy who only agrees with about half of its agenda. And that's the other part of it. There's a large contingent of Democrats on Twitter who are convinced the party has leverage over Manchin they failed to exert, never mind that he's the only Democratic statewide official in West Virginia, and it's vastly more popular there than Biden. Why can't Biden play hardball? because he can't. Right? Madison
not with
Cawthorn
the
was an
voting
expendable
populace.
freshman House member in a safe Republican district. Joe Manchin is the only Democrat holding statewide or federal elected office in West Virginia. You can't compare him to how the Republicans treat their people compared to how Democrats treat theirs. And the other background context is that a lot of leftists on Twitter believe in the rotating villain theory, which is the idea that Democrats have to hide the fact that they don't actually want progressive change. So when in power, they pick one or two key members to play obstructionists. So in their mind, Joe Lieberman did that, then Ben Nelson, now Manchin, now Sinema. But the other explanation is just that moderate Democrats are going to exist in almost every majority, and they're the ones most likely to block the most aggressive pieces of any, aggressive agenda. That's
true.
Just the way it is.
If you have only a bare majority, somebody's going to be the key vote. And first, they don't necessarily realize that about themselves. They might not set out to do that, but once it happens it becomes obvious fairly quickly how much leverage they have, and they seek to use it. That's what they're there for, to use their leverage for their state.
That's their job.
Yes. We may disagree about what their state needs, but then it's their job, not yours, and you can try and push them, but,
So here's how does that work in real life? Well, let's see. This is an off-year election, so let's see what happens.
All right.
This is a piece from Amanda Carpenter from The Bulwark about how bad Doug Mastriano is, just as a reminder.
Yes, okay, thank you.
Although Mastriano evades scrutiny by blockading typical media interviews with some help from his insurrection-friendly friends, he doesn't hesitate to talk about his plans when he feels comfortable. Put those snippets together, and it shows Mastriano has a pretty well-thought-out election takeover plan in mind. His platform includes loosening restrictions on poll watchers to make it easier to challenge votes, repealing vote-by-mail laws, appointing a fellow 2020 election denier to be Secretary of State. We've covered this on the show. Forcing all Pennsylvania voters to re-register, and defunding the Pennsylvania Supreme Court. He's suggested all of them.
Defunding the Supreme
That's
bad, right?
Because you can't wait for a Supreme Court next year to say Supreme Courts can't tell you what to do.
Yeah.
So he'll just do it himself.
That's funny that he ends up on defunding. But, he too throwing his lot in there with somebody else I was thinking of reading about yesterday who's, I guess, the same thing nationally. Just thinks all voter registrations across the country should be erased and then start from scratch, and everybody you won't have any problem if you're a law-abiding citizen re-registering. Although it does remind me that usually, if we try this with guns, by the way, it's why are you punishing law-abiding citizens? I registered to vote legally years ago, and I haven't committed any crime or even committed fraud in any elections, unlike you guys. Why should I have to re-register? But
right.
Apparently
so that was a background
piece
for this piece that I wanted to talk about.
I did not realize that.
And you may recall the famous Sir Isaac Newton, who is famous for two, at least, very, very profound statements. The first of which is Boris Johnson is a stupid git. And the second one is for every action there's an equal and opposite reaction.
Yes.
And so this is Julian Routh writing in the Pittsburgh Post-Gazette, a group of Pennsylvania Republican leaders are bucking party to endorse Democrat Josh Shapiro for governor.
Oh.
Which is rather interesting, and we need to see more of that, and takes us full circle to where we started, which is more of the Republican Party needs to do this with Trump and other people. And what analysts are calling an unprecedented move in an era of extreme hyper-partisanship, a group of Republican leaders, including a number of former officials who have been stalwarts of Pennsylvania's GOP establishment for decades in Harrisburg and D.C., is bucking their party to endorse Democrat Josh Shapiro. Mr. Shapiro, the sitting attorney general, will roll out the endorsement of 10 Republicans today as part of a continued effort to label his candidacy a reach across the aisle who will unify the parties to get things done, the thing that got Biden elected, in other words. The list includes two former U.S. representatives, Charlie Dent and Jim Greenwood. You remember Charlie Dent. You may not remember Jim Greenwood. I say that because I don't.
Okay.
Former State House Speaker Denny O'Brien, former Lieutenant Governor and longtime State Senator Robert Jubelirer, 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 And former state Supreme Court Justice Sandra Schultz-Newman, the endorsements aren't just vague odes to bipartisanship. They serve as a direct hit against State Senator Doug Mastriano. Morgan Boyd, the chair of the Lawrence County Board of Commissioners and the only current official on the list, said Pennsylvania is at a crossroads, and Mr. Shapiro is the only candidate with a vision, the experience, and plan to bring it back. Oh. So we'd like to see more of that. Christopher Bork, director of the Muhlenberg College Institute of Public Opinion. Muhlenberg.
Yes.
Muhlenberg says it's hard to break ranks in this era of negative partisanship, and that even though some Republicans have deviated from President Donald Trump, it remains pretty rare. In Pennsylvania statewide races, it's even more rare, especially to come out publicly in support of the opposition. The list the GOP endorses represents the bedrock of the Pennsylvania Republican Party and speaks to the many Republicans who aren't enamored with the direction. Endorsements don't matter much, but as Mr. Shapiro puts together his case, they'll serve as evidence against his opponent. I think for most Republicans, they accept Mastriano as their nominee and most likely will vote for him, but on the margins, and the margins are going to be important, I think the endorsements will help Shapiro's case in key areas.
Okay.
So he expects Mastriano to call them rhinos, yada, yada. That doesn't matter.
Okay.
The question is, are they going to have somebody who makes the case as well as Liz Cheney does?
Well,
some of these are professional politicians, so hopefully they can find somebody.
Okay.
Keep an eye on that one. I think that's awfully interesting.
Well, Mastriano really needs to be defeated, and hopefully they can hold that together. Well done, I guess, for this group, and hopefully there will be more.
Right. And let's see, my last two topics, and we're not going to have time for both. I think maybe we'll just touch a little bit on coronavirus because we haven't done that lately. And then, of course, there's Dobbs-Roe Supreme Court. The one thing I'll say about Dobbs-Roe Supreme Court, and this fits with talking about Doug Mastriano, Andrew Kaczynski, the K-File, writes, the Republican nominee for Michigan Secretary of State is someone who said, quote, demonic possession is real and transferred via intimate relationships. And my comment on that was that's a hell of a way to describe pregnancy. And, somebody on Daily Kos, when I posted that, said, well, that or, just having sex in general.
Yeah, could be either one. I don't know which one she means. But certainly want to preserve the right to safe, legal abortion in the case of demonic
it was pointed
possession.
out to me. It's not really fair to call pregnancy a demonic possession. That really doesn't happen until the kid's around 2.
Okay. So that'd be like the, like the 12th trimester or so.
Yeah, something like that. But, again, the whole point is Democrats are running on the idea that Republicans are extremists who have gone too far. And those Republican endorsements for Shapiro just help that theme. It's not like they're key to his winning. They're key to his campaign theme.
Yes.
And it's a campaign theme that matters because that can be done in any one of a number of ways, including pointing out he doesn't let his opponent doesn't let media in. Let's see what happens if there's a debate. Let's see if Mastriano will even debate, all that stuff.
Yeah. Well, unknown quantity there. It's difficult to know. I'm sure someone has seen Mastriano debate before and has some opinion about that.
Right, but if he doesn't let media into his events, that's something that let's just say one can highlight if you're his opponent.
Yes, although there was a time when people said, "Well, how about this presidential candidate guy not releasing his taxes? That can't work."
Well, but people assume too much.
No Trump.
What the campaign has to do is. Shapiro's campaign has to do is hammer it.
Okay.
It's one thing if reporters write it as a one-day story and then they move on to something else. And it's another thing if there's paid ads every 25 minutes. I mean, I'm telling you, Richard Blumenthal is not really in danger of losing his seat.
Right.
But he is hammering his whoever his opponent is going to be.
Well, good. It's
about
good for everyone if he does.
The Supreme Court decision.
All right.
Republicans want to elect more Republicans, he says in his ad, which is playing on TV like every 15 minutes here, in order to make national a complete ban on abortion, which would change all of Connecticut's laws protecting you. So every Republican elected matters. Don't do it. here in Connecticut, if you want to defend what's going on and what you have, you better not be electing any Republicans. I mean, it's a pretty effective ad.
Good. All right. Well
and,
done.
That's what Democrats need to do across the country. I believe they are doing it, whether it's Shapiro or whether it's Secretary of State in Michigan or whether it's Richard Blumenthal in a safe seat in Connecticut. That's the play. And I'm just telling you, people are doing it.
Okay.
Okay. And last thing, in the 30 seconds we have, new ultra-contagious Omicron subvariants, BA4, BA5, are worsening California coronavirus wave. It's also true in Australia. And there's a new paper, which is highlighted in The Guardian. The original strain had a R0 of 3. That means for every case, you can expect around 3 people to catch it. The Delta strain had an R0 of 5. Omicron BA1, the OG Omicron, had 9.5. BA2 had about 13, and BA5, BA4 and 5, which is around now, has an R0 of about 18. To put that in perspective,
18.
flu is about 1.5 and measles is about 18. So the current circulating virus is pretty nasty, and if you feel like you still need to wear a mask, go ahead and wear that mask indoors.
Yes, I would. I would recommend that. I still do that, and I guess I will continue to do that because.
Where's the music? I don't hear the music.
Well, we're not up yet. We have 15 seconds before we do the music. It's we get the extra.
All right, so I
got
that topic in.
Yes, you did, and
I got everything in.
All right, yeah. The
I have
R0
nothing to talk
for
about
all
tomorrow.
of your topics was 25, and we got them all through. So that's interesting. Does this? I guess it doesn't say anything about the transmission itself, though, right? It's not going to be like measles in the sense that 2 hours after somebody is in a room.
It's airborne.
I mean, yeah, but it doesn't. This number doesn't necessarily speak to the survivability of the virus out on its own. And
it's airborne.
It's just,
you have to assume it's in the air. So
and it just stays
for a while. I don't know how long.
Yeah, well, that's something to figure out. All right.
If it's airborne, it doesn't. One virus or another, it's still the same problem.
Crap. That's bad. All right, welcome back now to the Kagro in the Morning Show here on Netroots Radio. That's it. I don't have anything to talk about, so I don't know. We should just replay the first half of the show, and that way we can stretch things out a little bit. Now, there's plenty, of course. Let me go and see what I have put away in Pocket. There were so many, so very many that I wanted to share. Let's see. You know what? This seems important. This one sort of floated out there too. It's too bad we didn't get a chance to talk to Joan earlier this week. Maybe next week we can take a shot at this one, which also brings me to a housekeeping note. Well, I guess I might as well cram in all the housekeeping notes at once. Next Wednesday, which will be, unfortunately, it's the day after the next January 6th committee hearings, the ones that are supposed to be so explosive about the various groups that were involved, the Oath Keepers and the Proud Boys, etc., etc. That happens on Tuesday during the show, so we won't be able to talk about it during the show on Tuesday. Wednesday, when we would ordinarily be digesting it, we will be without a live show on Wednesday. It's just one of those days that I have to take and spend on some family projects, etc. And it takes too long to explain exactly what the hell's going on there. But anyway, nothing major, not going away for a week or anything like that. It's just a Wednesday we're going to have to miss. And we'll digest these things on Thursday, just as well as, I guess, all the writing will be happening on... Well, I guess it really would be happening Tuesday afternoon. But all right, give everybody a day to digest things. And we'll be back on Thursday of next week to cover what happened on Tuesday of next week, which hasn't happened yet, but we're predicting the future. But while we're on the housekeeping moment, the housekeeping minute here, which will turn into 5 minutes, another name of another fantastic patron who has, in fact, in this case, boosted their contributions monthly on Patreon. So a hearty thank you to Michael Cruis. I hope I'm pronouncing the last name correctly, Kruis. Everybody all at once. Thanks, congratulations, and thank you, and welcome, and what other things? Happy birthday. I don't know what other things we can shout out about that. It's not his birthday, but eventually it will be. So when that comes around, Michael, thank you very much, and happy birthday to you, whenever that may be. We appreciate your support, of course, and I think that leaves us up to date, where we've got a lot of names to call out lately. And I appreciate that. And for the rest of you, time for me to really sit down at some point soon and cut a new fake commercial spot that we use during the podcasts to remind everybody that Patreon is an easy way to join up and have the monthly contribution taking care of covering costs here and making things viable to keep us on the air. So I appreciate it. Thanks, Michael. Appreciate the rest of you who every once in a while realize either, oh yes, I really should be contributing, or perhaps I could contribute more, or perhaps I could go out and beat up my neighbors and take their money and give that to David, or whatever path you choose. And let's not be beating up too many neighbors, unless you're Rand Paul's neighbor, in which case, go for it, I guess. I mean, I don't recommend it. It's still against the law, but what can I tell you? That was a great story, and everybody enjoyed it. So anyway, where were we? Yes, right. Oh, something I wanted to discuss with Joan, who didn't come yesterday, and we hope will come next week to discuss something about this. She's been keeping us up to date about judicial nominations and how the Democrats in the Senate have been handling that, and how Joe Biden has been handling that, and pointing out that they are confirming judges at a record rate. But apparently there's a real problem because judges are quitting or retiring, or I guess dying. I don't know what's happening out there, at a record rate as well. And in Slate, Christopher Kang points out that we have something of a problem with some time pressure attached to it. Democrats are headed, he says, for a disaster. Oh no. A disaster with unfilled judicial vacancies. The subheader just says there's only one way to fix it, and I imagine the way to fix it is nominating people to those seats. What's taking so long? Well, let's see what Christopher has to say about this. At the end of his first year in office, President Joe Biden's staff rightly trumpeted the fact that he had nominated and confirmed a historic number of judges at the start of his first term in office. After decades of Republicans outpacing Democrats in focus on the courts, and yes, it's been happening for decades, and it's not just a now thing that people now realize, oh gee, Roe v. Wade has been overturned, but it doesn't register with everybody. It doesn't register with every Democrat the way it does with Republicans. It's true. Well, after decades of Republicans outpacing Democrats on this focus, it was welcome news that there were so many nominations being made and confirmed. But today, as terrible decisions from the Supreme Court offer a stark reminder of the importance of the judiciary, we face a tough reality. Even an historic pace has not been enough to keep up with the rate of judicial retirements. And President Biden and Senate Democrats are on track to leave more than 60 judicial vacancies open at the end of this year, with the possibility looming that Republicans may retake the Senate. We know that leaving any vacancy open in January could well mean letting a newly empowered Mitch McConnell blockade them, just as he did President Barack Obama's picks, from Merrick Garland's Supreme Court nomination to dozens of lower court nominees. And I guess sometimes people forget about the fact it wasn't just Merrick Garland that was blocked. It's time for Senate Democrats and the Biden White House to push beyond their current practices in order to fill all of the judicial vacancies by the end of this Congress. As someone who worked on judicial nominations in the Senate and the Obama White House, that's our author here, Christopher Kang, I know how hard it can be for Democrats to challenge norms, but we have seen Republicans stop at nothing in their relentless push to take and retain control of the federal judiciary, to impose their extreme partisan agenda on a majority of Americans who oppose it. Our federal courts are so far out of balance that we need the president and the Senate to do everything in their power to ensure justice and equality. And that means filling every vacancy, even if it means breaking with the few remaining judicial confirmation process norms left in McConnell's wake, or standing up to Republican senators. And guess what we're talking about here? And among other things, blue slips, I'm sure we'll have to get a mention here. Beginning to bring balance to our judiciary is more important than respecting Senate traditions. A more aggressive approach to judicial confirmation starts at the White House. Today, there are more than 80 judicial vacancies without nominees. Yeah, I guess in that sense, they really do begin at the White House. Out of 119 announced vacancies. So that's the vast majority of them. One of the driving causes for this is too much White House deference to senators, both Democratic and Republican. The Biden administration needs to take a more assertive approach and show it is willing to bypass Senate tradition if senators are not proving good partners. In states with Democratic senators, the White House is honoring a long-standing tradition that allows senators of the president's party to recommend district court candidates to the White House. This is fine, but the White House needs to be firmer in enforcing its own deadlines in states where senators are moving too slowly. Even before Biden's inauguration, White House counsel Dana Remus told Democratic senators to submit recommendations within 45 days of a vacancy being announced. But it is clear from the number of long pending vacancies without nominees that many senators are ignoring this timeline. In California alone, there are 9 district court vacancies without nominees, 5 of which were announced more than a year ago. Time is running out, and the White House needs to start enforcing its request by bypassing senators where necessary. To move forward with nominations in states with Republican senators, the White House and Senate Judiciary Chair Dick Durbin must be willing to bypass the Senate tradition known as the blue slips, right, which allow any senator to functionally veto district court nominees in his or her own state. This tradition was weaponized by segregationist senators to stop pro-civil rights judges nominated in their home states, and during the Obama administration, it persisted as an enormous obstacle to diversifying the judiciary. Anyone who thinks the White House can work with Senate Republicans on judicial nominations should look at Wisconsin, where Senator Ron Johnson recommended a qualified district court candidate, only to abruptly pull his support after the nomination was actually announced. It's worth noting that when Republicans controlled the Senate under Donald Trump, they ignored blue slips from Democratic senators on circuit court nominees, effectively dismantling that deference for Democrats when they were out of power. Or Democrats when they are out of power. Let me add here. I know there's only like a sentence or two to the end of this paragraph. Maybe I'll finish the paragraph and come back around. Abolishing the blue slip custom once and for all will require cooperation from the Senate, but the White House should force the issue and expose the absurdity of the system by nominating qualified, professionally diverse nominees in these states and then daring the Senate to block them. I wanted to double back here. It does say quite clearly and quite correctly here that it's worth noting that when Republicans controlled the Senate under Donald Trump, they ignored blue slips from Democratic senators, right? It's more than that. When Republicans controlled the Senate under, whenever they controlled the Senate in the last couple years, but I guess let's say when they controlled the Senate under George W. Bush, they did the same thing. I mean, this is a recurring pattern. Whenever Republicans control the Senate in the last couple go-rounds, they've ignored the blue slip system at their leisure. Orrin Hatch did it when he was chair of the Judiciary Committee. Grassley did the same, and it's something that they do very frequently. It's not just this one last time they did it. We've been through this where we've gone through it a couple of times. Hatch ignoring blue slips, and then Democrats retaking control, and under Pat Leahy saying we're going to reinstate the blue slip system to their detriment, because then Republicans would just withhold their blue slips for nominees made by a Democratic president. Then losing control of the Senate again briefly to Republicans, Grassley simply repaid the good faith restoration by Pat Leahy of the blue slip system by revoking it again and just saying, of course we're going to revoke it again. We have precedent for it. Orrin Hatch did it. And when Trump began making nominations and Democrats sought to block them by withholding blue slips, they just said, oh, we actually don't care about blue slips. Remember, we didn't care about them under George W. Bush when Orrin Hatch was chairing, and you should have guessed that we would do this again. Now, that being the case, you might have thought that when Democrats took control of the Senate again and a Democrat was elected president, that the Democratic chair of the Judiciary Committee would say, well, there's tons of vacancies. We have to fill them at a record pace. And even then, we have to break our record pace just to fill the numbers of vacancies that are occurring. So we're definitely not going to make the same mistake that Pat Leahy made last time and was repaid for by having the blue slip standard abandoned a second time by Republicans. But then you would be wrong, because that's just what Dick Durbin did. Let's try it again, and maybe this time our kindness will be repaid. I'm kind of doubting it. All right, just wanted to let everybody know that they have actually been through this cycle a number of times. And it's not like Durbin is new to the Senate from the last time it happened prior to Grassley. He was there for Orrin Hatch and his doing it. All right, well, at any rate, the White House increasing nominations will be of little use, though, if the Senate Judiciary Committee ends up serving as a bottleneck. Before being confirmed, each judicial nominee must appear before the committee for a hearing. It's usually the case anyway. As a result, the number of hearings scheduled and the number of nominees who can appear at each hearing are probably the most important factors in determining how many nominees will be confirmed before the end of this Congress. Right now, committee Democrats are following norms and recent practices, but this is simply not sufficient to fill every judicial vacancy, and indeed sets a path that would leave more than 60 seats open. The norm is for the committee to hold a nomination hearing every 2 weeks that the Senate is in session. At that pace, it will hold only 6 more hearings, with enough time for committee votes this year, anyway. The current practice, which was set when Republicans expanded it to process Trump judges more quickly, calls for 2 circuit and 3 district nominees per hearing. So, this schedule would allow for hearings for only 30 judicial vacancies, while 65 receive no committee consideration at all, and that assumes that every hearing slot is used for lifetime judicial nominees, even though just last week the committee gave a slot to a Department of Justice nominee. Despite the stark reality, a Judiciary Committee aide recently told Bloomberg News, "I don't think there's any reason for us to change the way we're operating." That's simply wrong. The Judiciary Committee must take a page out of the playbook of Senate Republicans used during the Trump administration and schedule additional hearings and add to the number of nominees who can be considered at each hearing. Holding more hearings may be less convenient for those involved, but with so much at stake, it's essential the committee follow the Republican model set during the Trump administration, which included holding hearings in consecutive weeks, even while the Senate was in recess. Once nominees receive committee hearings and votes, they will need time on the Senate floor to be confirmed. Republicans are doing everything they can to slow down the Biden nominees, and if President Biden and the Judiciary Committee ramp up the speed of nominations, Senate Democrats will need to match Republicans' fortitude, skipping or delaying recesses and staying in Washington over weekends to vote if necessary. None of these steps should require the Biden administration to compromise on the quality of judges it's putting forward. One of President Biden's most impressive judicial legacies in the first year in office was the record-breaking number of public defenders and civil rights lawyers that he nominated, a sharp departure from the old paradigm of Democrats primarily drawing from the ranks of prosecutors and corporate lawyers. The White House must not undermine its well-earned legacy on the courts by curbing its focus on professional diversity or accepting deals that would include conservative extremists. And I think we all know which one we're talking about there. Instead, it must rally Democrats together at every stage of the nomination and confirmation process to fill every vacancy with judges dedicated to justice and equality. More than 30 national organizations already agree. Now, more than ever, our courts and our country demand nothing less. Well, okay. There's a very soaring rhetoric at the end, even if it is a bit trite. But okay, you certainly get the idea. And, we've mentioned blue slips 100 times here, and you ought to be frustrated with that at this point. But just to put some numbers to it, 60 that could be left entirely unfilled, which seems like a huge mistake. And I also feel like that we made that mistake with Trump as well, leaving vacancies in place. Well, although that largely was Mitch McConnell's doing, but even so, in the last year or so of the Obama administration. But of course, I feel like we might have made the same mistake during the last changeover to Republican control of the Senate during the Obama administration, and the Democrats there too likewise dropped the ball. But I suppose it happens to everybody, even though Republicans pressed harder on a more aggressive schedule. The reason that the Biden administration was able to break the records that they broke with the pace of their judicial nominations is that the Trump administration was unable to get their nominees in place in time. So it's clearly a very challenging situation, but I guess the motivation of the recent terrible decisions from the Supreme Court ought to alert senators to the need for emergency action. Okay. So we mentioned to you, Greg mentioned the grand jury subpoenas to Lindsey Graham as well as to Giuliani. I thought those were pretty interesting. And, I don't know whether there's more that we need to discuss on those besides the fact that they've happened, though I do have pieces from Roll Call and local news from the Atlanta Journal-Constitution that might suggest that there are some interesting process details to uncover, but perhaps we'll see whether we turn back to those. But I can certainly share those articles with you so you can share in the joy of recapping, if nothing else, the fact that these two have been subpoenaed. That's good news. Why don't we add this piece to the mix? I grabbed an interesting headline piece from The Hill, which goes back to, let's see, we go back to last Friday when my dad had given me a call in the morning just before the show to mention something kind of like this. It's, I guess, really in the same vein. After the EPA decision at the Supreme Court and the worry that between this invention of the major questions doctrine, which isn't a thing, and so probably we shouldn't grace with even the name of doctrine here, between that and the filibuster, leaving it nearly I guess if both the filibuster were still in place and the major questions doctrine stood as precedent for any number of other cases that might come up in the future, it makes running the federal government nearly impossible, sort of the ultimate pipe dream of Steve Bannon, as we had mentioned. And this piece in The Hill, I guess, makes a similar point and then turns focus on the filibuster. Stuart Shapiro is the opinion contributor here for this piece. Did the Supreme Court just tell the Senate to abolish the filibuster? Well, of course, not in so many words, but you'll see how he gets around to this conclusion. Stuart Shapiro, I'll skip to the bottom and read the identifier, is a professor and director of the Public Policy Program at the Blaustein, Bloustein, Blaustein School of Planning and Public Policy at Rutgers University in New Jersey, and a member of the Scholars Strategy Network, about which I know nothing, but there's a little link here that might tell you something about them. Here's the way he puts it in a short little piece. Last week in Virginia versus EPA, thinking about the same case we were thinking about, the Supreme Court invoked the, quote, major questions doctrine, unquote, in determining that the Clean Power Plan issued by the Obama administration was illegal. The major questions doctrine essentially says that for really big decisions, such as requiring shifting our sources of power in order to combat climate change, agency regulations are not sufficient. Congress must specifically legislate on these major questions. Many have focused on the court's ambiguous language regarding what qualifies as a major question. That's a big problem, to be sure. To some degree, this misses an important point about policymaking in the current climate. The more major a question is, the less likely it is that Congress, as it's currently constituted, will be able to pass legislation on it. And don't think that they're not thinking about that. This is true regardless of how we define major. For decades, Congress has delegated many policy decisions to the agencies of the executive branch, like the EPA. It does this for two reasons. First, Congress, much smaller in terms of staff and hence expertise than the executive branch, does not have the technical knowledge necessary to decide where to set standards for arsenic in our water or whether a new vaccine is safe. How would you like that if the safety of vaccines are being passed on by Jewish space laser lady over here? The second reason, though, is that Congress would prefer the politically difficult decisions, the ones that impose costs on individuals or businesses, to be made by someone else. Congress can then get credit for solving a problem, like cleaning up the air, but blame the agencies for imposing burdens like requiring stringent emission standards to solve that problem. There is thus a reasonable argument that on truly significant questions of policy, Congress should legislate and assume political responsibility for the results of that legislation. Congress is, of course, the branch of government closest to the people, and in a representative democracy, that is important. As many have noted, it is not a coincidence that Congress is the first branch listed in the Constitution. Article 1, right? But the Congress of 2022 is not the Congress that the founders envisioned. It is not even the Congress that President Biden served in for decades. Congress struggles each year to pass a budget, and in recent years, with the exception of a response to the deadliest pandemic in a century, Congress has passed little other legislation. One primary barrier to the passage of legislation is, of course, the filibuster in the Senate. What was once a rarely used tool that required senators to hold the floor until a supermajority of their peers voted to end debate has become a de facto requirement that 60 votes are necessary to pass any non-budgetary legislation. As a result, the last time major non-budgetary legislation, besides pandemic relief bills, passed Congress was the first 2 years of the Obama administration. It is reasonable to conclude that eliminating the filibuster is necessary if Congress is to be expected to legislate on major questions. There are numerous counter-arguments to eliminating the filibuster. One is that maybe the public doesn't want legislation on major questions. But polling data on issues like climate change, abortion, and gun control, all policy areas recently the subject of Supreme Court decisions, by the way, all indicate otherwise. Dissatisfaction with Congress does as well. Another counter-argument is that making laws should be hard. I agree. But the experience of Republicans when they controlled both houses of Congress and the presidency from 2017 through 2018, and of the Democrats currently, shows that even bills that require 50 votes through the reconciliation process or repealing regulations using the Congressional Review Act, even when bills require 50 votes, those bills all require negotiation and compromise and take months. Getting rid of the filibuster will not lead to an avalanche of legislation. It will just lead to more than we get now. President Biden reportedly looks back fondly on an era when he was a senator and hard compromises led to landmark laws in environmental protection, disability rights, and many other policy domains. But to get that era back requires different rules than prevailed during the president's senatorial career. The Supreme Court has just given him the reason to support elimination of the filibuster. If Congress is to address major questions, the filibuster has to go. Well, novel, interesting, and something we've been thinking about for quite a while, and it came up at the very least last Friday, as I mentioned. So, okay, a little bit of rhetorical support for that proposition, and you can always... It's always good to have a little bit of extra support for that position. And, all right, we'll take it where we can find it. Time now for another 2-minute break, catch our breath, and organize for the final drive to the end of the show. Hi, it's me, David Waldman, the same guy who was just talking to you a second ago. Our Patreon subscription drive is still going strong, with over 175 monthly donors who help keep us on the air. If we've helped keep you going during the pandemic, why not return the favor and help us keep going so we can all be together for the next disaster? Patreon.com, Patreon.com, makes it easy to make secure, recurring monthly contributions to support our show. Patreon.com/KagroX gets you straight to our donation page. Maybe you'd like to thank us for keeping you sane during the Trump era. Maybe you're looking forward to in-depth explanations of what's going on in the Biden administration. Whatever it is that keeps you listening, we need your help to keep bringing it to you. And hey, if you happen to prefer using PayPal or even the Square Cash app, we're up and running with those options too. Thanks again, everyone, for all your support. We literally could not do this without you. Welcome back now to the Kagro in the Morning show here on Roots Radio. Let's see. You know what might make a good use of time is to go back to, did we just do this, was it yesterday? Or, yeah, I guess so, right? Because we didn't do our show Monday. We were reading through the just security treatment on the independent state legislature theory, just to switch gears from one newly invented theory to another less recently invented than major questions doctrine, but still fairly new. And we might start over again just to give you all the context on what Helen White had written at Just Security in an article titled "The Independent State Legislature Theory Should Horrify the Supreme Court's Originalists." But of course, they're gimmitarians more than originalists. So that's why they're not horrified, is what underlies my thinking about all of this. But there was also a point of disagreement that I had with Helen White that I never did get around to yesterday. All we were doing was agreeing with Helen White because she was doing a great job in the introduction to this piece, which perhaps we can pass through quickly without reiterating all of yesterday's comments. But just to remind you of what's going on here, Helen writes, this morning, when it was June 30th, the Supreme Court decided to hear Moore v. Harper, right? The challenge to the congressional maps in North Carolina that has the potential to upend over 200 years of election law. In Moore, members of the state legislature, and remember that it's important in all of this to think about the legislature as just a distinct identity, not the state government per se, although in historical context, it's a little difficult to separate that. And I think she might discuss some of that. But if not, consider that state legislatures have taken many different forms over the years. We forget because we're mostly frozen in place with bicameral state legislatures that mirror the federal legislature, but that wasn't always the case. And then there are, of course, states with referenda, ballot referendum possibilities that they can legislate that way. Is the work of a referendum any less legislating than the work of the legislature? Well, in some cases, I guess you could say yes, given that in some states legislatures have chosen to ignore the outcomes of referenda. So there is that. But as we were saying, let's read through this. So Moore v. Harper is the name of the case. In Moore, members of the state legislature are urging the Supreme Court to reinstate the map that they drew, the congressional district, and that North Carolina courts struck down as unconstitutional and redrew. They're hoping that they'll do this using what is known as the Independent State Legislature Theory, or ISL, That theory claims that the federal Constitution gives state legislatures the power to regulate federal elections without checks from other state officials or constraints from the state's constitution. And again, as I said the other day, anytime you see someone advocating for an originalism that throws out the concept of checks and balances, I think alarm bells should go off. That doesn't sound at all like what we were taught the originalist interpretation of the constitutional scheme was. Though more concerns congressional redistricting, the ISL theory reaches far further and would have sweeping and dangerous implications for most aspects of federal elections. In 2020, Justices Clarence Thomas, Samuel Alito, Neil Gorsuch, and at times Brett Kavanaugh all indicated that they would have adopted the theory and its vast consequences on the emergency docket. These justices are all part of the court's originalist faction. Originalists, like those four justices and Justice Amy Coney Barrett, contend the constitutional provisions mean what they meant to the public that adopted them. And we'll skip Barrett's explanation for why, but since 2020, new historical research has emerged that puts the ISL theory at odds with the original public meaning of the Constitution. Though all eyes will be on Justice Barrett, who has not yet opined on the theory, Moore also offers the rare opportunity for Justices Thomas, Alito, Gorsuch, and Kavanaugh to show the principled nature of their commitment to originalism, which they don't have, by updating their views in light of new founding-era historical analysis. And there's no chance that they will view new historical analysis as at all binding on their understanding of things. They are, after all, conservatives, and we like the old historical scholarship, the one that said we were right. All right, so what about defining the ISL theory? It is really multiple overlapping theories that fall within a broad name. The crux of any version of the theory is that the federal Constitution's mention of state legislatures, and he encloses the word in quotes here, in the elections and electors clauses, should be understood as a grant of sole authority to state legislatures in setting the rules for congressional and presidential elections, respectively. In some versions, that means a state legislature's regulation of federal elections could not be struck down by a state court on state constitutional grounds, the exact scenario at issue in Moore. They drew congressional districts. The state Supreme Court said, no, they're biased, they are discriminatory, they minimize the voting power of black Americans, they are facially discriminatory, and they were designed that way with almost surgical precision, they said. And the claim is, yeah, well, you don't know what you're talking about, so we shouldn't allow state Supreme Courts to rule on these things at all anyway. I mean, it's a theory, but not much more than that. The Moore petitioners go further and claim that under the theory, a state legislature may not even delegate power to other state actors, like courts or elections officials, to implement state election law where the legislature fails to address an issue. Under some versions of the theory not at issue in Moore, governors could not veto state laws concerning federal elections, nor could citizens by ballot initiative change the rules for federal elections. The Supreme Court gets to say, the United States Supreme Court says what goes in every state, and it doesn't matter what the voters in those states say about how they want to conduct their elections, or even what their elected officials say, necessarily, because if it gets reviewed by a state Supreme Court, they can just ignore that whole thing. That seems pretty expansive of federal power, don't you think? That also seems like maybe something the originalists wouldn't be into. Proponents of this version of the theory read the reference to legislature to mean only state assemblies and state senates, sometimes called institutional or formal legislatures, and not the broader legislative process, such as gubernatorial veto or citizen ballot initiative used by a state. And While the Supreme Court has never adopted the theory, in Bush v. Gore, Chief Justice William Rehnquist, joined by Justices Antonin Scalia and Clarence Thomas, advanced a version of the theory that would allow federal courts to step in and block state court interpretations of state law, where the federal courts found those interpretations to diverge too much from the plain text. Any or all of these versions of the ISL theory promise to be hugely disruptive to federal elections. Laws struck down under state constitutions or revised by ballot initiative could be revived for federal elections, resulting in the disenfranchisement of countless voters. And because ISL would not have any effect on the rules governing state elections, administrators and voters would need to comply with two different and potentially conflicting sets of rules for federal and state elections simultaneously. That chaos, in turn, may make it easier to gin up false claims of election fraud, and so make it easier for politicians to mess with vote counts or wrongfully refuse to certify election results. It is worth a quick pause, however, to clarify what the independent state legislature is not. And I think here I differ with her a little bit. Through the January 6th committee hearings, we are learning more about Trump's efforts in 2020 to have state legislatures overturn the will of the voters and appoint their own preferred slate of electors. Although the theory underpinning that effort claimed that state legislators had a gobsmacking amount of power, the independent state legislature theory, even in its maximalist form, would not give state legislatures the right to veto their voters' choices. I don't know about that. That is because, under the ISL theory, in all of its forms, and I dispute this, state legislatures must still comply with federal law, including the many federal and constitutional provisions that set the framework for federal elections, guaranteeing voting rights and prohibiting arbitrariness and discrimination in the counting of ballots. I don't know. It's my contention that there is at least one version of the independent state legislature theory. And it's perfectly valid to say, no, he's talking about something completely different. He's just latched on to the term and is hoping to go along for the ride. John Eastman's theory of the independent state legislature is one that does, in fact, include the right for state legislatures to overturn the will of the state's voters and simply appoint electors of their own choosing, regardless of the outcome of the general election in the state, and in fact in contravention of the outcome of the general election in that state, and that it's their right to do so and no one can stop them, and they're not time limited by it, and that they can choose any premise they want as motivation to do it. If they think they can survive it politically, or even if they don't think so, they still have the right to do it. So it's not the case. I mean, it ignores Eastman's claims. Now, it might mean, and she might be right about this in the end, but it might just be the case that she's simply saying, well, what Eastman is advocating here is really not the independent state legislature theory. He's simply, because he's advocating for something completely wacko, but that involves a state legislature dealing with the rules of federal elections, he just says, oh, yeah, it's the independent state legislature theory, that popular thing that actually won its way to a review in the Supreme Court under completely different circumstances and for a completely different reason. And if the court actually does validate the theory in Moore, then that means my theory is right, because my theory, which deals with something very different and in a very different way, I decided to call it the independent state legislature theory, or say that it was dependent on the validity of the independent state legislature theory. And so far, no one has written any articles about why that's not true, and I should not be allowed to link my dumb theory to the other dumb theory, but the one dumb theory that actually earned its way to the Supreme Court, however arbitrary that was, given who voted to take it up. But they're not the same thing. but he's just planning to say that they are. And if Moore goes the way of the petitioners, he'll say, I was right in saying that Vice President Mike Pence could choose to ignore the current electoral slates and send them back to the states, and the states could say, yes, the people of this state voted for Joe Biden, supposedly. But we all know that only fraud could have done that, and so therefore we think that the electors for Donald Trump ought to be forwarded to Congress instead. Why? Oh, I don't know. Independent state legislature theory? What does that have to do with anything? I mean, why not just call it, the jack-in-the-box theory? Why not? What does that have to do with anything? Oh, nothing. I just, if you accept that this is a theory that means something, or we'll just take a regular theory that actually does mean something. Okay, the political questions doctrine says that I'm right and you're wrong. I mean, that actually would work because then it would render the whole thing unreviewable by the Supreme Court. But pick any doctrine you like. The right to privacy is recognized under Griswold, which was also in trouble, says that the state legislatures can dismiss this the slate of electors and choose their own. It doesn't say that. No, I know that, but I'm saying that it does. It's a little more plausible if you can at least say, well, legislature, state, independent, something. I don't know. All those words are involved in what I'm saying, and so why won't you just recognize that my theory is part of this theory? Because it doesn't follow. The independent state legislature theory doesn't say that you can throw out the results of the general election in your state. I know, but what if it did? Wouldn't it really be almost cool if it did, to paraphrase the president? All right. Well, anyway, in addition to all this, I guess I can point out that when I first read this thing, I tweeted out, I was a little bit disturbed by the way she said, well, one thing it doesn't do, the independent state legislature theory, is give state legislatures the right to veto their voters' choices. Now, not just Eastman saying that it does because he wants to misname his theory ISL, but it does have another path. The independent state legislature theory, as she says, would not give the state legislatures the right to veto their voters' choices. And I was saying, no, not directly. It doesn't do that. But it would give them the thin premise that coup Trump supporters said they needed to declare their state's electoral votes invalid. That part it can do. It basically, it doesn't say, well, one of the powers of the independent state legislature is to decide even after they've decided to go with an election to choose their electors. I know all the terminology is it's like double talk, right? But once the state legislature has made the decision to use a general election for the purpose of determining which members of the Electoral College will be entitled to vote on December 14th and forward that slate of votes to the Congress for counting. Once they've decided that contest will be decided by an election, that should be it. That's all they're actually called upon to do. I mean, I think the whole independent state legislature theory is garbage, and it doesn't, in fact, mean that state legislatures have to make every single minute decision about how to run an election. They just make this one overarching general decision about how to select a state's electors. And once they do that and commit to it and hold an election, they're bound by the results. But what the independent state legislature theory does say is that the premise of even false claims of fraud are enough probably for a state legislature to say, we never delegated to anyone in this state the power to make the decision to run the election such that this kind of fraud, which we're making up, could have happened. If it's the use of drop boxes or the lengthening of hours during which you're eligible to cast your vote. Very frequently we find judicial decisions behind that. If there are voting machine problems at a certain precinct, you'll hear these stories all the time, and the voting machines didn't work, and there was a 2-hour delay in opening up the polling place as a result. They'll then say, okay, well, if state law currently says that, or state regulation, sometimes it's just the Board of Elections that in a state that sets these limits, and currently at 8 p.m. is the end of voting on this day, and they have all sorts of rules that surround that, right? Of course, you always hear about these things. If you're in line at 8 p.m. and they still haven't given you the opportunity to use one of the voting machines and cast your ballot, but you were in line by 8, you have the right to stay in line and cast that ballot even though it's after 8 p.m. These are the things that state legislature and those and the proponents of the ISL can point to and say, if the state legislature didn't say that if you're in line by 8 p.m. you have to be allowed to continue to vote, or didn't say that if the polls didn't open at 8 a.m. as they're supposed to, but opened at 10 a.m. because of voting machine problems, that you can vote for an extra 2 hours in this precinct. You frequently have judges saying, look, the obvious intent was to have 12 hours of voting, whether it's according to state law or according to state regulation. And people are entitled to depend on the availability of their polling places for 12 hours. And so if this one opened at 10 a.m., it will close at 10 p.m. And state legislatures and proponents of ISL can point to that and say, a judge said that, not the state legislature. Therefore, it's invalid. Therefore, fraud. Therefore, the whole thing is invalid. The thinnest of premises can be used to throw the whole election out under ISL. So, no, it doesn't directly give state legislatures the right to overturn the will of the people, or whatever you want to call it, when a general election has been held, particularly for president or for presidential electors, anyway. But it does give them the premise that they need to read it in the most expansive possible way. The legislature didn't say that there should be a slot 6 inches wide in a ballot drop box. We didn't say anything about it. Who decided that the slot on this drop box, on these drop boxes, should be 6 inches? What if we wanted them to be 5 inches or 8 inches? You didn't ask us. Therefore, the whole thing's invalid. Therefore, no electors have been chosen, so we can name our own. That's the real problem with the loophole. And, I mean, there's any number of problems that she outlines with ISL all by itself. The other problem is that it just leaves loopholes that a truck can drive through. That's my big problem with it. All right, well, we'll continue on with her explanation of things here with the next part, debunking the independent state legislature theory. That should be fun. So on, then, she says, to the merits of the theory. Again, she being Helen White, author of the piece here in Just Security. On to the merits of the theory, and in particular the Constitution's text. The proponents of the theory rest their argument primarily on the fact that the elections and electors clauses of the Constitution refer to legislatures as opposed to states as the entities that regulate federal elections. This use of legislature, according to the theory's proponents, therefore means that only the legislature and not other state-level actors is empowered to regulate federal elections. But the singling out of a single word without looking to the broader context of the Constitution or the historical context of its enactment is exactly the kind of literalism that strips language of its context that Justice Barrett derided as an academic. That was the part that we skipped, unfortunately. I probably was unwise to skip over that up at the beginning. Maybe we can go back to this, right? As Justice Barrett has explained about originalism. Originalists care about what people understood words to mean at the time that the law was enacted, because those people had the authority to make law. That's a little awkward. Like, we have the authority to make law too. But the people who made the law, well, when they made it, they had the authority to make it. Otherwise, they wouldn't have made it, or it would have been thrown out at some point, presumably in between then and now. And so it's their understanding that we seek to latch onto. You're the ones who made the law. You're the ones who had the authority to do it. Let's understand it from your perspective. But as Helen White points out, singling out a single word without looking at the broader context of the Constitution or the historical context of its enactment is exactly the kind of literalism that strips language of its context that Justice Barrett decried as an academic. The contextual reading of these clauses plainly rebuts the ISL theory. How so? Let's see. Start with legislature. At a basic definitional level, the term legislature requires reference to the state constitution that creates it. Right? We'll have to take a look. Is the legislature bicameral or unicameral? Remember, we do have unicameral legislatures in our states. Well, one anyway, Nebraska, right? So what's a state legislature? If you want to know, you got to look at the state constitution to find out. It tells you what form it's going to take. How many people? What qualifications to sit in it? Answering those basic questions requires incorporating state constitutions' definitions of each state's legislature. The theory's proponents, thus, are asking the court's textualists to read the word legislature to mean as defined by some, but not all, of the state's constitution's provisions. Moreover, the framers generally said so when they wanted to give a branch unreviewable power. That seems like an odd invention, don't you think? See, for example, Articles 1 and 2, the House of Representatives shall choose their Speaker and other officers and shall have the sole power of impeachment, that kind of thing. Adopting ISL thus reads sole into the text where the framers kept it out. That implausible reading is all the more improbable when considered in light of founding-era historical context. As Vikram Amar and Akhil Amar explain in a 2022 article at the founding, the public meaning of state legislature was clear and well accepted. A state legislature was an entity created and constrained by its state's constitution. Thus, unsurprisingly, as Hayward Smith explains in his own 2022 article, the decade after ratification of the federal Constitution, every state except South Carolina, for some reason, to have had a ratification of the federal Constitution. Every state except South Carolina. Why did I read this way? Okay, I'm going to have to start the sentence over again, which is difficult enough as it is. In the decade after ratification of the federal Constitution, every state except South Carolina to have had a constitutional convention adopted state constitutional provisions regulating federal elections. That choice makes no sense if the founding era generation understood the federal Constitution to bar state constitutions from doing so. And more recent historical scholarship, this time from Eliza Swerin Becker and Michael Waldman, no relation, explains why state constitutional constraints on state legislatures regulating federal elections were so universally adopted. The founding generation was concerned that self-interested partisans would twist election rules to benefit their faction. Were there any ambiguity in early state practice, Michael Weingartner's 2021 piece shows that since the founding across the country, state constitutions have regulated both the procedure and substance of federal elections, and state courts have consistently reviewed laws regulating federal elections. And the Supreme Court has repeatedly rejected the ISL theory when upholding this kind of state regulation. Over a century ago, and this is where Armando comes in Ohio ex rel Davis v. Hildebrandt, the Supreme Court held that the Elections Clause's reference to legislature is to the legislative power of a state, not the actual body itself necessarily, which contains the state constitution and laws. So too in Smiley versus Holm, where the Supreme Court held that legislative action under the Elections Clause must be made in accordance with the method which the state has prescribed for legislative enactments, including the state's constitution. Yes. As recently as 2015, in Arizona State Legislature versus Arizona Independent Redistricting Commission, yes, time to play our music and wind up, the Supreme Court rejected ISL by upholding the use of independent redistricting commissions, bodies that are decidedly not the legislature, for federal congressional elections. And in 2019, in Rucho, is that how they pronounce it? Rucho versus Common Cause, all 9 justices agreed that the state constitutions could be used as a check on partisan gerrymandering in congressional elections. Adopting the ISL theory is thus at odds with more than 100 years of Supreme Court precedent. That doesn't matter anymore. And would disrupt whole bodies of law written by state legislatures and reviewed by state courts relying on that precedent. The momentum to adopt ISL and upend this unbroken line of precedent and related state practice began building in 2020, all of a sudden, when Alito, Gorsuch, Thomas, and sometimes Kavanaugh all signaled a desire to do so because they needed it in various cases concerning the 2020 election. But new arguments and scholarship have demonstrated that doing so would be inconsistent with the original meaning of the Constitution. This all, of course, by the way of summative language that restates the thesis already stated, of course, and somewhat annoying and very difficult to deal with when you have time constraints. We'll skip it, but I think we got through the bulk of what needed to be discussed there. Maybe sometime Armando can come on and confuse us further.
From networksradio.com, you have been listening to Kagro in the Morning with David Waldman.
Anyway, as usual, it comes down to the fact that originalism is crap and it's basically just gimmitarianism in disguise. Once again, exposed. Now, on to the West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy with Justice Putnam, who will make his own review of the day's news and happenings around the country and around the world.